The grand ballroom of the Lancaster Hotel shimmered in golden light, its chandeliers casting a warm glow over the elegantly adorned guests. The air was rich with the fragrance of luxurious perfume, aged wine, and freshly polished mahogany. It was an evening of extravagance, the annual charity gala, where the city's most powerful and influential figures gathered. Laughter rippled through the room, conversations flowed effortlessly, and the soft clinking of glasses punctuated the lively atmosphere. Servers moved with practiced grace, ensuring no guest was left unattended. Among them was Daniel Carter, a young black man with a quiet demeanor and an unwavering work ethic. Dressed in the standard black and white uniform, he carried a silver tray, with the ease of someone well accustomed to the role, expertly placing champagne glasses before some of the wealthiest attendees. But Daniel didn't belong here, not truly. He was a musician at heart, a pianist who lived for the deep, soulful notes of jazz and the intricate beauty of classical compositions. Yet passion alone didn't cover expenses, and so, for tonight, he was just another nameless worker in the background, acknowledged only when needed. At one of the most prestigious tables near the stage sat Victoria Lancaster, a woman whose fortune and influence were matched only by her vanity. Draped in a gown that shimmered like the midnight sky and adorned with diamond earrings that caught the ballroom's light, she commanded attention without effort. However, beneath her flawless exterior lay a sharp tongue and a penchant for cruelty, especially toward those she considered beneath her. As Daniel approached to refill a guest's glass, he felt her gaze settle on him, cool, assessing, and filled with unspoken judgment. Her manicured fingers idly traced the stem of her wineglass, her distaste barely veiled. "Careful with the glass," Victoria said, her voice dripping with condescension as Daniel poured. "Wouldn't want to stain something that costs more than your yearly salary." A few guests at her table chuckled, though some exchanged uneasy glances. Daniel didn't react. He had encountered people like Victoria before, entitled, arrogant, always eager to remind others of their supposed place. Instead, he simply gave a polite nod, murmured, "Of course, ma'am," and continued on his way. But that wasn't the end of it. Moments later, another waiter, Daniel's friend Miguel, rushed past with a tray of desserts and accidentally brushed against Victoria's chair. It was a minor mistake, barely noticeable, but for someone like her, it was unforgivable. She gasped dramatically, spinning toward the waitstaff with an exaggerated expression of offense. "Honestly, does the hotel let just anyone work these events now?" she said loudly enough for heads to turn. Miguel immediately apologized, his face flushing with embarrassment, but Victoria wasn't done. Her gaze flicked toward Daniel, who had just stopped at the next table. "You!" she called out, her lips curving into a knowing smirk. "Since you're already here, why don't you entertain us? Play something on the piano for the guests." For a second, Daniel thought he had misheard her. He turned slightly, his brows drawing together. "Excuse me." Victoria's smirk deepened. She tilted her head toward the magnificent Steinway grand piano near the stage. "The piano," she repeated. "You can play, can't you? I mean, all of you love jazz, right?" A quiet tension settled over the nearby tables. Some guests exchanged uncertain glances, sensing the mockery woven into her words. Daniel stood still, emotions churning inside him. Music was his passion, his life. But this? This wasn't an invitation. It was a taunt, a game, a setup for humiliation. Victoria didn't want to hear him play. She wanted a spectacle, a performance to confirm whatever shallow stereotype she held. His eyes flicked to Miguel, who gave him a small, encouraging nod. He could feel the weight of the stares around him, some curious, some uncomfortable, and a few eagerly anticipating his failure. For a brief moment, Daniel considered refusing. He could simply shake his head, walk away, let Victoria revel in her petty triumph. But then something inside him shifted. A quiet defiance. A need to prove, not to her, but to himself, that he was more than what she assumed. So, with a deep breath, he set down his tray, adjusted his sleeves, and turned toward the grand piano. The ballroom grew silent. Would this waiter, the man Victoria so clearly saw as insignificant? Prove them all wrong? A hushed stillness settled over the room as Daniel Carter stepped toward the Steinway. His polished black shoes tapped softly against the marble floor, the weight of countless eyes pressing against his back. He could feel it, the blend of curiosity and doubt, the unspoken expectation that he would falter. Near the stage, Victoria reclined in her chair, lazily swirling her wine, a smug satisfaction in her expression. To her, this was just another moment of amusement, another opportunity to remind the world of its hierarchy. Daniel reached the piano and exhaled slowly. His fingers hovered just above the pristine keys. Ivory keys. It had been months since Daniel had played an instrument of this caliber. The last time had been during an audition for a prestigious scholarship, one he had been denied, not for lack of skill, but because the judges had decided without saying it outright that a young black man didn't belong in their esteemed classical program. But tonight there were no judges, no panels to impress, no biased gatekeepers, just the watchful eyes of the city's elite, some waiting for him to stumble, others secretly hoping he would prove them wrong. A brief pause. Then he began to play. The instant the first note filled the ballroom, the atmosphere shifted. His fingers danced across the keys with a confidence that caught the audience off guard. The music that flowed from the piano was not hesitant, nor was it meant to be mere background noise. It was commanding, raw with emotion, and utterly captivating. Gasps rippled through the crowd as Daniel transitioned seamlessly from a soulful jazz introduction into a classical masterpiece. He blended the two styles effortlessly, his hands gliding across the keys with breathtaking precision. His body moved with the rhythm, as if the music wasn't just something he played but something that lived within him. Among the audience, a few musicians, including a world-renowned pianist, sat frozen in astonishment. This was no amateur. This was a talent worthy of concert halls, not a man waiting tables. At her table, Victoria Lancaster had gone rigid. The smirk that had curled her lips moments ago was gone. Her fingers, once idly twirling the stem of her wineglass, now clenched it tightly. The amusement in her eyes had faded, replaced by something almost like disbelief. She had expected a joke, a spectacle at Daniel's expense. Instead, she had given him a stage, and he was owning it. The murmurs that had once filled the room had vanished. The only thing that remained was the music, and then the crescendo. Daniel ended with a flourish, his fingers gliding over the final notes before the last chord echoed through the grand hall. Silence, but not the awkward kind, the stunned, reverent kind. Then applause. It started hesitantly, one person clapping, then another. But within seconds, the entire ballroom erupted in cheers. People stood from their seats, their ovation thunderous. Some whistled. Others rushed forward, eager to speak to him. "Where did you learn to play like that? Who are you? Have you performed professionally?" Daniel remained seated at the piano, offering only a humble smile. He hadn't played for their approval. He had played because music was his soul, his truth, because no amount of wealth or privilege could ever take that away from him. Victoria Lancaster, however, sat frozen. The same people who had laughed with her minutes ago now ignored her, too caught up in their admiration for the man she had tried to belittle. For the first time, she was not the center of attention, and she hated it. The applause still roared, but Daniel remained composed. He wasn't basking in the moment, nor did he glance at Victoria with triumph. He simply bowed his head in quiet gratitude, the way true artists do. Then, from the crowd, a well-dressed older man stepped forward. He had barely noticed Daniel while he was serving tables, but now his face shone with admiration. "That was extraordinary," he stammered, shaking Daniel's hand. "Where have you been hiding, young man? Have you performed in London? New York? Surely you've trained at Juilliard or the Paris Conservatoire?" Daniel shook his head with a polite smile. "No, sir. I never had the opportunity." A ripple of shock moved through the guests. "No opportunity?" A woman in an emerald gown gasped. "But your talent, How could they not see it? Daniel's expression remained calm, though a familiar sting surfaced in his chest. He didn't need to explain. The privileged, the powerful, they had always dictated who was allowed through the doors of their world. He had spent his life fighting to be seen. Tonight they had no choice but to listen. Then, a commanding voice rose above the chatter. "Mr. Carter." A distinguished silver-haired man stepped forward. Daniel recognized him instantly. Nathaniel Blackwood, a legendary music producer who had shaped the careers of some of the world's greatest pianists. Blackwood studied him for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he extended a hand. "I'd like to offer you an audition," he said, "if you'll accept it." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. An audition with Nathaniel Blackwood was more than an invitation. It was a golden ticket, a chance at a career most musicians could only dream of. Daniel's heart pounded. He hadn't expected this. He hadn't even dared to imagine that one night could change everything. Before he could respond, a sudden crash shattered the moment. All heads snapped toward Victoria Lancaster. Her wine glass lay in shards on the pristine white tablecloth, deep red liquid bleeding into the fabric. Her fingers trembled. Her face was pale. This wasn't how the night was supposed to go. Victoria had spent years as the queen of this social circle, envied and admired. But now, the attention, the power, had slipped from her grasp and settled squarely on the man she had tried to humiliate. She forced a tight-lipped smile, lifting her chin. "Well," she said, her voice smooth but hollow, "I suppose we should be grateful for the unexpected entertainment." Attention spread through the room. It was a subtle dig, but everyone heard it. A last-ditch effort to reclaim control. Daniel, however, was unfazed. He had spent his life encountering people like her, people who hated losing, especially to someone they believed was beneath them. His gaze met hers, steady and calm. "I wasn't playing to entertain you, Miss Lancaster," he said softly, his voice carrying across the ballroom. "I was playing because music speaks louder than privilege ever could." A hush fell over the room. Victoria's face flushed. Her lips parted as if to respond, but no words came. Because she knew, everyone knew, she had lost. Daniel turned back to Nathaniel Blackwood, his resolve firm. "I'll take that audition, sir," he said. His voice was steady, unwavering. "And I promise, you won't forget it." Blackwood's lips curled into a grin. "I wouldn't expect anything less." The ballroom erupted into cheers once more, but this time it wasn't just for the music. It was for the underdog who had risen above it all. Victoria Lancaster, meanwhile, remained silent. For the first time in her life, she was the one being ignored. The rest of the evening blurred around Daniel. People shook his hand, praised his performance, and shared how deeply his music had moved them. He had begun the night as a waiter. Now he was the most important person in the room. But Daniel wasn't thinking about them anymore. His mind had already leapt forward, toward the future. A week later, he stood before the grand doors of Nathaniel Blackwood's private concert hall. He took a deep breath and stepped inside. This was it. The audition room was breathtaking. A golden-lit stage, a flawless grand piano sitting at its center. In the front row, Nathaniel Blackwood watched intently, flanked by an elite panel of producers and music directors. This was the moment Daniel had dreamed of, fought for. He stepped forward, placed his hands on the keys, and let everything go. He didn't play for recognition or fortune. He played for the love of music, for the passion that had carried him through every rejection, every obstacle. Each note told his story, his struggles, his resilience, and his triumph over those who had doubted him, people like Victoria Lancaster. When the final chord rang out, silence filled the hall. Then, the room erupted. Applause thundered through the space, but Daniel barely heard it. His heart pounded, his breath steady. Blackwood stood, clapping with a rare enthusiasm. "That," he said, "was one of the most extraordinary performances I've ever witnessed." He turned to the panel. "Gentlemen, I believe we've just discovered the next great pianist." Daniel felt a wave of emotion rise within him. This was more than just an audition. It was the moment that changed everything. Across the city, inside her lavish mansion, Victoria Lancaster stared at her phone, her jaw clenched. Every social media platform, every news outlet was flooded with headlines. From waiter to world-class pianist, the astonishing rise of Daniel Carter. Victoria Lancaster's plan backfires. How she lost the spotlight to the man she tried to humiliate. Her fingers tightened around the glass in her hand. She had orchestrated his public embarrassment, yet instead she had handed him the stage of a lifetime. And now the world had moved on. The name Daniel Carter was everywhere. Hers, fading into irrelevance. Months later, Daniel stepped onto the stage of Carnegie Hall for his first major performance. The audience was packed, some drawn by the buzz surrounding his name, others eager to witness the talent that had captivated the world. The lights dimmed. He took his seat at the piano, fingers hovering over the keys. This time there was no hesitation, no fear. As the first note rang out, the music once again told his story. But now, the whole world was listening. And this time, no one was laughing. Daniel Carter's journey wasn't just about talent. It was about perseverance, about rising above cruelty and proving that true worth is not measured by privilege or wealth. Victoria Lancaster had once tried to diminish him, but in the end she had only made him shine brighter. And as Daniel took his final bow that night, he knew this was only the beginning.